My name is Tommy Palm, and I'm very happy to be back in Amsterdam. I used to live in Netherlands for a while. I used to be fluent in Dutch, not anymore. The name of this presentation is something about shipbuilding in the 15th century and VR. And this picture here is from East Indian Company from here in Amsterdam. And it's one of the first multinational companies in the world. It was founded back in 1602 and had enormous power. It was kind of quasi-government power to it. They could wage war, they could take prisoners and execute them, they could start colonies. As an entrepreneur, I'm kind of intrigued by that type of power. I think in a way it belongs to the past, but we might be also moving into an era where the powers of corporation is huge, of course. But the reason why I'm having this here is I want to talk about warships. And warships was kind of like skyscrapers are today. They were the most technology advanced things that they had at that time, and it was super impressive. And governments put a lot of money into building this. I'm from Sweden, and we have the Vasa ship. Who of you have seen this ship? A few, great. So the Swedish king Gustav Adolphus, he wanted to build the most powerful ship in the history, and he got a Dutch shipbuilder to come from Amsterdam to help him build this project. And he spent 5% of the Swedish gross national product on building this ship. So this was an important task, and they wanted it to be enormous. Unfortunately, the Dutch shipbuilder died during the production. This was back in 1627 they started, and it was launched in 1628. Unfortunately, the ship sank immediately on the maiden voyage, went out to Stockholm harbor, got some wind, and it went down and under. Some people died. The king was probably rather furious at the time. It wasn't the shipbuilder's fault, though. He died already. At this time, there was no simulation programs they could build. If they wanted to build something new, they would have to wing it. So it was very much experience-based. One reason why it was great to build this type of ships in Sweden was that we had a lot of oak trees. Sweden at this time was sparsely populated, and there was a lot of trees, and some of them were oak. And oak was the best material to build in. It's super strong. It grows really slow. This is the oldest oak we have in Sweden. It's more than 1,000 years old. And normally it took several hundred years at least for an oak tree to go to a place where you could use it in production of ships. Sweden had a power of greatness at this time and then produced a lot of ships and started to come to an end where they were using up the oak. And some very forward-thinking kings thought, hey, we better plant some new trees. So in hundreds of years ago, they'll be ready for the ships back then. So I actually started that. One of the reasons why I'm very interested in this is that in 1987, this was my absolute favorite game. So Sid Meier's Pirates. And it's one of the first open-world simulations. In this game, you would be a privateer. You could be a Dutch privateer. And you travel around the Caribbean, and you wage war, and you capture other ships, and you trade and stuff like this. Fantastic game, and it got me really inspired in doing game design and simulation games. But we're also talking about VR today, obviously, virtual reality. If you, like me, have ever tried to build a 3D game engine, you know how incredibly much computational power goes on in the background to simulate 3D scenes. And in virtual reality, that's enhanced even more, because you do this for both eyes. You actually have to render 170% approximately on the scene, on the visual scene, in order to do this, and you need to do it very, very quickly. If you do target Samsung Gear VR, you have 60 frames per second that you need to keep in order to keep the comfort level high for the consumers. But this is all abstracted away very much with great tools today like Unity 3D and Unreal Engine. Even as a game developer, you don't have to care very much on the insane computation that goes on in the background. The idea behind virtual reality is obviously to try to trick the brain into thinking that it's somewhere else and that seeing and hearing something other than the real world. And the way we interface with the world is through these 5 senses. And we're, at this point, already pretty good at tricking the visual sense and the hearing. When it comes to smell and taste, not so much. Scientists have been trying to do smell simulators, but the molecules tend to mash up a little bit, and it's very hard to keep it flowing. The last one, and it's sort of the most tricky one, is the touch. The ideal situation for VR is obviously you would reach out with your hand and feel something, and you feel the texture on your skin. We're not there yet. But if you show somebody VR, you will often see this thing when they're trying to use their hand to interact with things. And it's a very natural and intuitive thing to do. Controls are one of the things that haven't been standardized, and it's not super clear yet to what is going to be the standards of controlling VR. Right now, the most standardized equipment is this, the Joy or the gamepad, which isn't really super good to control games. I always felt that it's alienating a lot of players. All the headsets right now have this component. This is a gyroscope, so you can feel, track the position. That's kind of a core thing in the VR thing. And most of them also have the microphone that can be used. Other than that, some of these are simulating hands, and that is really good for VR. In the end, we all kind of want this as game developers, that all the consumers have a omnidirectional treadmill in this home. That's probably not going to happen for some time yet. I saw this tried out on GDC last year, and somebody described it to me. I just overheard the conversation. It said, yeah, you step into this giant diaper, and then you run around. And that's not a good start, I think. But hopefully we'll get there. Have you tried the toy box demo? Some of you might have done this from Oculus, where you can try the new touch controllers that you saw there on the screen in the middle that looks like evil eyes. Here are the touch controllers. They'll help you to simulate your hands, so you actually see your hands, and you can reach out and grab things. And this is incredibly convincing that once people get the hang on how to control this, it's such a fluid experience, and you can play around with it with a friend, so it's a kind of multiplayer experience. And there's just a lot of different toys, and you interact by touching them and doing normal things. So there's a lighter on the table, and you just flip it, and you start it, and then you can use that fire in order to start fireworks and things like that. And it's incredibly interesting. One of the things that I reacted to is that one human-computer interaction style that's been very important for us in the evolution of computing is this direct manipulation. It started back with graphical user interface on Windows with folders and things that you can click on to represent the file system. And later in smartphones was around before the multi-touch screen, but the multi-touch screen made it so much more accessible to a broader target audience and much more intuitive, and that's very important for games too. I thought a great way of showing that is this YouTube video of an African bullfrog actually playing a game called Ant Crusher. If you haven't seen this clip on YouTube, I'm not going to show it now, but it's fantastic. So he's kind of playing, he wants to catch the ants with his tongue, and it works out really well for him. And it shows really well how intuitive something becomes when you have direct control, when you can reach out and touch virtual objects. So right now there's 2 tracks for VR. It's the corded one and the non-corded. So on one side you have a PC and console, which gives you a lot more processor power, and it's sort of a more old school way. You have a lot of people expecting to see AAA games People like me who've been waiting for VR for 30 years and have an idea of what type of games I want to play there. This also has positioning, so the ability to see where your head is relative to a fixed point on the table. So you can move in and look closer to something. And this helps with nausea, and it's a really good thing. It also helps with the 3D interfaces, like being able to use your hands. Currently, there is no standardized way of doing this on mobile VR, and that's one of the big handicaps on mobile VR right now. Otherwise, with mobile VR, it has a very attractive price point. If you look at Samsung Gear right now, it's a $99 addition to your smartphone, and you have a really cool virtual reality headset. It's also very portable, so you can bring it with you to shows and show what you have done. You can bring it home to your friend's place and play something over there. And to me, it looks much more mass market at this point than this side of the thing does. It's also a multi-purpose device, which I think is important for several reasons. I'll get into that later on. But both these tracks are moving the VR market forward, so they're very important to us, of course. I wanted to show, right now, my company, Resolution Game, is working a lot and focusing a lot on mobile VR, and that's where we have most of our background. And this is what our fishing game currently looks on a current generation smartphone. And I'm going to try to play it so you get a sense of how that looks. It has a semi-low frame rate here, but that's because of the video, not because of the actual game. And there are some interface elements. It's still in the early phase. The game is not going to be launched for another couple of months. But it gives you a sense of what you can do already today, which to me is kind of mind-blowing, because you have seen this progression where you had black and white pixels, and you could make games in that, and just a couple of years later, and you can do really awesome things with a smartphone. So the future looks really bright. One of the things that I'm very interested in mobile VR is that it's connected to AR, which is a sister technology with augmented reality, where you see through the real world. And this is a graph from Goldman Sachs, which predicts that VR and AR together has the potential to be a $110 billion market 9 years from now, which is a very staggering number, of course. But if you think about it, the reason we carry around a smartphone in our pocket today of this size is because of the screen. So if you can have the screen attached to your glasses or on a lens and get it more fluently, you don't have to carry around this piece of metal and glass in your pocket. And that changes the world for VR and AR quite a lot. There's a company called DigiCapital in the US that has made a forecast that's just 4 years away, saying that it's a $30 billion market, and games will be approximately half of that market. And from my point of view, having worked with VR for a little bit more than a year now, I think that's probably rather accurate. Games will definitely lead and pave the way for the VR market. VR will be a lot more than games. It's fantastic for education, movies, and a lot of other things, but games are always important to push hardware forward and get people interested and try these things out themselves. I think it's a very different market than the smartphone. This is my two friends of mine, Kieran and investor Paul Brigill. And Paul is trying our fishing game, and Kieran instantly fools around with him, putting crab shell under his nose while he can't protect himself. And you know, I don't see the situation where you would be in the subway and put on virtual reality and play, because you don't know what's going on around you at all. So this is much more something you'll do in your sofa or in the office. So it's more of a console experience in that sense. This is a slide that I've been using quite a lot in my pitches around resolution games, etc. These linear things are showing some old console growth. It's Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. And these are showing smartphone growth with iOS and Android. And what I've been saying is I think that there is a great opportunity here for players who realize that they actually like to play games from their smartphone. Games like Candy Crush and Angry Birds convinced a lot more people that games are actually something that can be fun and to do. A lot of these people would never go out and buy dedicated gaming hardware, but they are very likely to want to do more gaming and more immersed gaming. And I think that's one of the opportunities for VR and also for smart TV gaming, etc. So one of the things that I really like with this device as a gaming device is that it's a multi-purpose platform. It's if your phone breaks or you forget it at home, you go back to get it or you go and get it repaired. If your Xbox breaks, it's maybe not the highest priority in your life, especially if you're grown up and you have kids of your own. It's very different from having this multi-purpose device that you use to a lot of things. And you are much more interested in investing a lot of money for something that you can benefit in many different purposes. And if you look at the evolution of computing, you'll see how we went from this mainframe era to the personal PC to this very portable era where we're in right now. And the next logical step for games and computing for me is VR and AR. And I truly believe that it's going to change the world again in a very big way. To me, these technologies are as big as the invention of the internet. One of the things that VR and AR, or especially VR, does really, really well is this sense of presence. The chief scientist at Oculus described it as the magic ingredients of VR, where you actually feel that you've been teleported somewhere else instantly. Another thing that's really great with VR is that you focus on the things that's there because your reality goes away for a bit. It's very easy to be stressed in your work situation, go into a game and calm down really quickly. Games have always been rather good at that, taking your mind off things. I think this scene in Matrix is really good when Neo does weapon training and there is nothing except for the weapon he's going to learn. And that shows a little bit of the potential of education in VR. Another thing that I think is important, one thing we see, we do a lot of user testing internally, and especially women react negatively to the fact that they go from a situation where you are many people in a social setting, you put them the headset on them and headphones, and they are completely isolated. And that is a very isolating experience, but if you do multiplayer in VR, it becomes the opposite. It becomes very, very social. So it's a great way of interacting with friends or loved ones. We do a lot of experiment to see. I think VR to me is a very experimental area. I don't see it being very theoretical. It's anyone who comes with a great VR idea and explains it to me, I kind of become very cautious because I think games are better made in iterations. Like you might have a seed to something, but you have to get it somewhere where you can try it on people to see whether it works or not. And in these early days of VR, that's especially true. Some of the things that we kind of discovered, and these are just random things that I thought about, is my top thing is don't move the camera around. Let the camera have a one-to-one correlation with the movement of the head of the actual user. You can do other things for movement if you want the character to move around, like third-person view, for instance, where you see the outside the body. The problem with this, if you do third-person only, you lose a lot of the feeling of presence. The fact that you are actually seeing through your own eyes is very convincing. There are some other great initiatives where people kind of ghost your body out and then you teleport to a new place. So there are some solutions to it. But my general recommendation is it's very uncomfortable to have a moving camera. We tend to see internally from our experimenting that dark scenes are more convincing than bright scenes. We don't really know why, but the brain can kind of easily see through bright and sunny scenes. It's one of the first things you think about when you do VR is like, oh, I would love to be on this mountain where I look out over a village. But it's not at all as convincing as being in a basement and it's dark and it's gritty and horrible. Your brain is much more prone to think that, oh, this is true. Sounds are super important. A lot of people say that. It helps a lot with immersion and the feeling of actually being there. Characters can become very convincing as they move close to you and look you in the eyes. Hollywood have been talking a lot about emotional implications of VR. Wanted to briefly touch on this kind of game design dilemma that we've been facing a lot. It's very easy to design for the swivel chair, but it's very uncommon user scenario. In most user scenarios, you'll be sitting in a couch or in an airplane seat or somewhere where you can't actually play in this direction comfortable for very long. So it's much better to design for 120 degrees, which makes it, we had a prototype that we made in a multiplayer scenario where you could actually teleport around. And it makes it super difficult because if people are moving freely in a space, they are very likely to get the interesting objects behind them. So that's a rather tricky situation when you think about it. So to start to finishing up, I want to go back to Gustav Adolphus. This is from he was killed in Lützen. Nobody can really tell what the future has in hold for very far. The oak trees that was planted hundreds of years ago, they were just ready. It was made a big news all over the world. They are unfortunately rather useless today as shipbuilding materials because we use steel instead, obviously. But the impressive forward thinking is really awesome. And one really cool thing, if you look at the number one things to do in Stockholm is to go and see this Vasa ship. And it brings in tons of income to the Swedish government each year. And the king wasn't, when you're doing experimentation, you might not always end up with the results you expect, but you might at least get positively surprised in the end. Thank you very much.
You're building a fishing game. What do you see as the main advantage of using VR for that? How does the experience change?
So I really like fishing myself. And one of the things I think is great with fishing is that it's extremely exciting at the same time as you're sitting still. And for me, it brings my pulse down instantly. So this feeling of being in an environment where I don't, like it's a very beautiful nature environment, I have the water, the sounds are there, and I'm doing fishing, is great. I think fishing is one of the things that would make great games, but there has been no super big hit yet. I don't know if we have that hit, but I think one day somebody will succeed really well in capturing the excitement about fishing and making it much more casual than actual fishing is. Because actual fishing is kind of rather hardcore. You have to go through a lot of ropes to actually get out and do fishing. And most of the times you don't even get fish, which you will in the fishing games.
Right, well, thank you, Tommy.
Thank you very much.
We appreciate you coming out. There's